Do you think this idea that we could potentially find a magic bullet to cure cancer that the pharmaceutical companies are working on, do you think this is a potential reality given that cancer is so complex and after all the work you've been doing?
Well, I don't believe there's going to be one magic bullet, and I don't think really any pharmaceutical company believes that there will be one magic bullet. So, in fact, their research is going into a much more targeted treatment of cancer. They're looking for changes in cell surface proteins that are receptors for certain drugs that can disable the cancer and keep it from growing. So I think that to say that I don't believe that they really think that there's one magic bullet, and I'm not sure these days that anybody does. 25 years ago when we got started, it was just ironic that the cover of the main news magazines had a big article about finding the magic bullet for cancer, and that was IL-2. So we know how far that got. And I think that most scientists and also the drug development people, the scientists within the pharmaceutical industry and the scientists in academia have moved away from the idea that there's going to be a magic bullet.
What are certain foods that you've found to be helpful with certain types of cancer? Do you think we should be focusing attention on looking at the effect of certain foods on cancer, or should we just be preaching the importance of a healthy lifestyle in general?
I think we should be preaching the importance of a healthy diet. But having said that, it's difficult for the average person to know, well, what is a healthy diet? And so there are certain changes that you can make to make your diet healthier, and those have to do with the type of carbohydrates that you consume, the type of fats you consume. I mean, there are really only a couple of fats that are healthy for you, as you probably well know. And there are certain carbohydrates that you absolutely should stay away from. If you can just remember to stay away from white carbohydrates, stay away from white flour, white rice, white potatoes, and white sugar. Those are pretty easy things to remember. I don't know if you've read that. You probably have read the book Switch, but there is an example in there. There's an anecdote in the book Switch about a study that was done in West Virginia, and the researchers went in and divided these two populations. They divided into two groups, and they made one intervention, dietary intervention, and that was reducing milk from whole milk to 1% milk to see if that had any effect on childhood obesity. And it turned out that it had a huge effect. That was one thing they asked them to do. So it was simple, it was obviously easy to remember, and it was easy to do because 1% or skim milk are both they're both very accessible and available. And just changing that. And the ironic thing when I read that book is I thought, this sounds very familiar. And I remembered that we had funded almost the exact same study that was done by a scientist up at Columbia in New York. And he had gone into Harlem and gotten a population of young Hispanic mothers and taken them and divided them into two groups and got one group to switch their children's milk from whole milk, 4%, to 1% or skim, and they had the same results. So I thought, well, this is really interesting. We sort of a little bit ahead of our time with that study. But wow. Eating, one thing I think, some of the rules of thumb that I think are just so easy to remember and that you should be able to do in your daily life. At least 5 fruits and vegetables every day, and it's pretty easy to know what a serving is. You don't have to measure it or weigh it. You know what a serving of a fruit or a vegetable is. It's really important to reduce the amount of red meat that you consume, and if you want to know what's the right quantity of red meat, think of a deck of cards. A portion of red meat should be no larger than a deck of cards, and you really shouldn't have red meat more than about twice a week. You should eliminate processed meats entirely. hot dogs, bologna, cold cuts, those kinds of things. They should not really, if you really want to have a healthy diet, they should not be part of it. And another wonderful rule of thumb is to remember to fill up your plate, cover half your plate with fruits and vegetables. And then that doesn't leave a whole lot of space for other things such as meats and breads and those things. We should all try to increase our intake of fish, especially fatty fish that have healthy omega-3 fatty acids in them. So those are just some simple steps that we can all take. We don't have to get as complex as the food guide pyramid, because that can be a little bit complicated.
In the screening aspect, what are some screening advances that you currently know of that could potentially relate to lung cancer, screening for lung cancer? I find I'm getting a lot of questions from people who want to know more about this. I just wanted to know if you had any input on maybe some kind of screening form we currently use for lung cancer.
Well, yes, absolutely. The lung cancer, the most recently, the study that I alluded to earlier, the NLST, or the National Lung Screening Study trial, was a study comparing spiral CT, or also called helical CT, versus chest x-ray. And chest x-ray is really a very crude tool for finding lung cancer in its early stages when it can be successfully treated. Fact of the matter is that chest x-ray finds cancer typically in stage 3 or 4 when it's very difficult to treat, and that's one reason we have such a dismal survival rate from lung cancer. The survival rate still is only about 15% for five-year survival rate. Spiral CT, on the other hand, can find very early lesions, and using sophisticated software and sophisticated algorithms, which are being developed as we speak, changes in size of a lesion can be measured. And by definition, we know that cancer, in order to be considered cancer, it has to grow. That's what cancer does. It doubles and doubles and doubles. And it grows out of control, and then it breaks out of the primary organ and goes to distant organs, which is what is called metastatic disease. And that's the disease that's so difficult to treat. So spiral CT can find cancer in the early stages, and when it's used appropriately with the right radiologists and the right people who are using the software, developing the software and the algorithms that can measure growth in a volumetric way, not a two-dimensional way, but a three-dimensional way, then we can say that this lesion is indeed cancer. If it's managed appropriately from a surgical standpoint, it can truly lead to a surgical cure of early-stage lung cancer.
Excellent. A few more questions. What is the Prevent Cancer Foundation? What are you personally most excited about? The one research that you guys are funding that you're just extremely thrilled?
Well, I'm really thrilled to be involved in the volumetric determination of lung cancer, to be involved in the studies that are showing that we can detect lung cancer early and we can significantly reduce the mortality rate. The NLST showed a 20% reduction between the two arms of the trial, which was spiral CT versus chest x-ray. But as we get farther and farther down this path, we'll likely see much more like a 80% mortality reduction benefit by using spiral CT and using it systematically to screen a high-risk population. And you have to be able to say what is a population that's at high risk for developing lung cancer, and the ones that you can point to. Everybody can develop lung cancer. We know many cases of people who've never smoked but have lung cancer, but you can't do population-based screening on a population that's not likely to get the disease. But 85% of lung cancer occurs in people who have smoked or continue to smoke and smoke a certain number of packs per day, and there are different ways to parse that and talk about, well, how many pack years did somebody smoke? I think that's maybe beyond the scope of this conversation, but I'm probably most excited about that of anything that's going on in the world of cancer research right now. Our foundation sponsors an annual workshop and has been for the past 8 years that brings together a group of oncologists and radiologists, software designers, people from industry, people from academia, from government, for example, the FDA, the National Library of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the National Institute of Medicine. We bring photonics experts in there so that we have people who understand fiber optics and how screening can best be developed to get to its most perfect application. And we put them all in a room, and these are people who don't find themselves in the same room very often, and we ask them to talk about how we make progress in not only using spiral CT screening as a way to detect cancer, but also as a way to assess new therapies, so that within 3 or 4 weeks you know if a new drug is working, rather than having to wait for years until you get the results of a clinical trial for efficacy.
And then the final question I like to ask, if you know somebody, or if there's somebody who currently was diagnosed with cancer, what recommendations can you make, considering all of the expertise you have over the last 20 or so years you've been working on this, I believe, that you can just give them to help them as they go through this ordeal?
That's probably the hardest question you've asked me. So cancer comes in many shapes and sizes, meaning it comes in many varieties and in many stages. And I do get that question a lot. I get that question from individual cancer patients. What's best for me? Where should I go for treatment? Should I get a second opinion? And it really depends on the type of the disease, on the stage of the disease. The recommendation will vary patient by patient by patient. So the recommendations that we make from a very general standpoint are to keep people from becoming cancer patients, or to find that cancer early when it can be either successfully treated, or when it can be removed in its precancerous stages and you don't even get cancer. Those are the kinds of recommendations we like to make. And then if individual patients ask us what's best for them, then we're happy to try to answer that question. But to make a general recommendation is just not something I feel capable of doing.
Great answer. So thanks again so much, Carolyn, for being with us today, and I really appreciate it. And I'm truly an advocate of the Prevent Cancer Foundation. I believe what you guys are doing is very, very helpful, and it's right where we need to be in regards to cancer. I think stopping it before it starts is the key, not doing it once it's there.
It's nice to be preaching to the converted.
I follow many of the guidelines myself. I try to stay fit as much as I can and stay away from the sweet foods and the fatty foods myself. So I love what you're doing, and I thank you so much for your time again. And what's the website for the Prevent Cancer Foundation again? Is it preventcancer.com, or what is it again?
Thank you for asking. It's www.preventcancer.org.
Preventcancer.org. Perfect.
Yes.
And thanks again so much, and I really appreciate it. And
My
we'll
pleasure.
stay in touch in the future. We'd love to have you on again.
I'd be happy to do that. Bye-bye.
Perfect.